Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Blackberry Passport and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, the thing I can definitely tell you about the Blackberry Passport is that I don't really think anybody should be going out and purchasing this phone today, and I don't think anybody should be going through and buying a phone like this anymore. I think there are substantially better types of devices to go ahead and buy, as you can probably imagine. So let's go and take a look at it throughout this whole entire video. But if you do want to go ahead and pick up some phones that I personally would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Blackberry Passport. This phone originally came out in 2014, so it is approaching about 11 years old this year, which is actually pretty insane. So being able to go through and buy and pick up a phone like this, of this type of caliber, is actually pretty interesting because these types of devices, right, as you can imagine, they're not really like the biggest flagships anymore, but these are so interesting because they just had that type of, layout of just having this like massive type of device with this massive type of capability. And I will say just the design language of this phone is probably one of the most peculiar things about this phone, if that makes any sense. Now, on the front side, you're basically getting this interestingly shaped 4.5-inch IPS LCD panel. So within this type of display, as you can kind of see, it is kind of a standard type of display for the most part. So there's not really anything, insane within this type of display that we haven't already seen before. So that is kind of one of those things to keep in mind here, right? If you're planning on getting a phone like this, it is a pretty, interesting type of panel. But there's not really anything inside of this display that, was super unique. It was everything surrounding this type of display that was even more unique. So this type of device is essentially going to be able to be giving you this, keyboard that was on the front side. So this keyboard was a very interesting choice, to say the least, from, BlackBerry. It was a very interesting choice. I think it was a, interesting thing for them to kind of do. Now, I don't really know if this would have been like one-to-one the best thing for them to do at the time, but it's definitely not the worst choice either. But it was very unique. A lot of people looked at this type of device and they were just kind of, I guess, like a little, I don't know the best way to describe it, but I think they were just kind of off-putted because of the shape of this particular device. I think they actually did like the way it looked, but the way it actually felt in the hand, because it was so wide, kind of gave a different type of impression for this type of device. But again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it was, one of those types of things that some people could have ran into when it came down to that type of problem. So that was always one big thing to kind of keep in mind there. You were getting a micro USB port inside of this thing. You were still able to go through and maintain a, micro SD card slot inside of this thing too, which was actually really cool. Having expandable storage inside of a phone, even back in 2014, was really nice. And even at this point, there were still lots of phone manufacturers that were basically removing out their particular port selections and everything like that. So at least on this one, we were still able to maintain some sort of a, expandable storage. Now, I will also say that when you're going through and picking up a phone like this, it's also really important to keep in mind that this type of device, although at one point it was probably a really good device to pick up, this thing was also competing with other phones in 2017 or 2014. And those phones were basically phones like the, Samsung Galaxy of that year. I believe it was the Samsung Galaxy S5 or the S6. You also had phones like the iPhone 6 that came out that year as well. So when you take a look at that phone and you kind of look at this phone, you can see how there could be some parallels of devices, but also the way this phone looked and felt, you have to kind of compare it to phones back in 2014, not necessarily phones of like this day and age. So just kind of keep that in mind when it comes down to it as well. Now, on top of that, when it comes down to the price tag, this phone right now obviously doesn't cost as much as it used to, but there is still kind of like this reasoning behind this type of device that a lot of people still like these types of phones, because they're like collector's items. So I think from that side, they're pretty unique, but I think otherwise it's not really anything crazy that I'd recommend even looking at anymore, to be honest, especially from a usability standpoint. Camera-wise, this thing is giving you that 13 megapixel standard camera on the backside, and that's kind of all you're really getting here. On the front side, it's a 2 megapixel camera. There's not really anything inside of this type of device that I look at and I'd be like, you know what, you have to go through and buy this phone, or it's like an amazing phone or anything like that. It's a pretty lackluster type of device nowadays. Back then, it was pretty much the norm, 1080p at 60 on the back, 720p on the front. That's pretty much what a majority of phones were essentially giving you back in the day. So that's basically what you're getting instead of this type of device as well. So it's more or less pretty much the same exact situation kind of going on. And I do think from that side, I mean, it's a really, really nice thing going on here. But I would probably say if you're going to go through and once again pick up a phone, there are a lot of other types of devices that you can also pick up too nowadays that just aren't necessarily these ones. With this one, it just doesn't make too much sense anymore, to be honest, right? Because it's not really going to be that great of a camera. It's going to be a hard item to find, but back in the day, it was a decent type of camera to say the least. But I will also say when it comes down to this type of phone, another thing to keep in mind for here is the, basically the software longevity. So this is one of those things to keep in mind here if you're planning on buying a phone. So within a device like this, right, if you're going to go through and pick up a device, this is going to be one of those types of phones that you're going to have to take a look at, and really you're going to have to remember. Because within a device like this, the biggest problem, in my opinion, that you're probably going to end up experiencing is that this type of device is pretty much no longer getting, software updates. And that is kind of the biggest problem that you're going to be experiencing here for the most part. If you're going to go through and pick up a device, this is one of those types of phones that basically is done getting software support. So from that standpoint, what would be the reasoning of buying this type of device anymore, right? This thing is already done getting software updates. There's probably more devices to go and buy rather than this one from that standpoint too. So from that standpoint, I kind of look at this type of device and I just think the same thing. I just think that it might not necessarily be worth it anymore because it's done getting software updates. There's substantially more types of devices to go and buy rather than this one when it comes down to it from that side. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there as well. On top of that, when it comes down to their capability, like when it comes down to their performance, you're basically getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset inside of this phone with 3 gigabytes of RAM. Now, this is also another one of those big things to keep in mind here too, right? You have to remember that if you're going to go through and pick up a device, a phone like, either one of these types of devices, you're definitely still going to be able to get like a good performing device from this thing for a 2014 phone. But for a phone of this day and age, it genuinely just doesn't make too much sense anymore, right? There are way better types of devices to go ahead and buy rather than this one. And I just don't see why you'd ever want to go and buy this phone from like a performance standpoint, right? This type of device, it just doesn't make too much sense to buy from that standpoint when there are way better types of devices to go and buy, rather than this thing. So I would probably say from that standpoint too, going through and buying a device, this one just doesn't really make too much sense from that standpoint either, right? The performance just isn't really that great. And like I said before, there are just way better types of devices to go ahead and rather buy than this one. So what I can definitely tell you, if you're going to go through and pick up a device, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to go through and buy these types of devices anymore, right? The Blackberry Passport, in the majority of situations, I can't really think of a situation where where I'd recommend this type of device anymore. I think when I take a look at these types of phones, it does make a lot more sense to go and buy something, maybe like like a phone that's still supported, something like a Samsung Galaxy that's still supported, or a Google Pixel, or an iPhone that's still supported. These ones just doesn't really make too much sense to me whatsoever. And there's substantially better types of devices that I recommend buying than this one. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.